Welcome to this second Lit in 5 video on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This is the second video exploring language. Check out the first video which explained the 5 areas I was looking at. This is the second part of that. So the first video on language talked you through these 5 areas in a bit more detail and gave you quotations related to number 1 and number 2. This video goes through area 3, area 4 and area 5. Area 5 is quite a meaty one, so there's plenty to say on that later, but first let's have a look at birth and nature imagery. Okay, so we're going to look first at birth imagery, and as I mentioned on the first video, the ideology, I think, which is underneath or behind Mary Shelley's depiction of Victor's newfound ability, his scientific power, if you like, of the ability to animate dead matter or to reanimate dead matter. Much of this centres on mockery, okay, and the privileging and the promotion of the female power to create life, which is no less awesome, amazing, fantastic, and incredible on a day-to-day basis. So here's Victor giving himself all the plaudits and all the sort of god complex that we've seen in previous videos, but have a look at this, and this gets to the heart of the mockery, I think. So Victor says, "When I found so astonishing a power placed within my hands, I hesitated a long time concerning the manner in which I should employ it." So might be a slight sort of mockery or undermining of Victor there. I've got this power. Oh, what do I do with it now I have it? So I hesitated a long time. I guess that's maybe a sign that he's only thought so far, that he has been so monomaniacally, a term I introduced on the previous video, focused on finding the secret to harness electricity and, you know, its scientific developments, that when he's finally arrived there, he's a little bit clueless as to what to do next. So I hear some slight mockery in there. This next bit is key though. Look at the scientific language on show here. Although I possess the capacity of bestowing animation, yet to prepare a frame with all the intricacies of fibres and muscles and veins, and here's the key bit. Using this, if you like, still remained a work of inconceivable difficulty and labour. Now, labour means work or task or enterprise, but you can't not hear that word and have these connotations of being in labour or giving birth. Similarly with inconceivable, okay? So to conceive obviously got strong connotations and associations with maternal birth and the female act of producing and creating children. So we're going to see lots of this now, and I'll quickly skim through some of the examples of these, if you like, this birthing language, this maternal birthing language, which is regularly placed within Victor's narrative voice as he tries to pioneer and celebrate and laud his own achievements. Mary Shelley uses so many maternal birth words, almost as if to say, well, the great lengths you've had to go to become a scientific pioneer, your legacy, your vanity, your ego, all the things we explored in the previous video. Guess what? Women have been doing this since mankind first kind of was made or crawled out of the river and evolved and became, depending on your point of view, capable of reproduction. Okay, keep that idea in mind as we move on through these next slides. So I prepared this stuff on Birth and Nature a while ago, and during this I came across a brilliant critic called Anne K. Mellor, who in a way puts this more succinctly and more neatly and more compellingly than I do. So I'm going to bring some of her quotes in and reference the article and then weave that into some analysis. So there's the title of the brilliant essay. Can absolutely recommend you have a read of all of that. Really inspiring, really eye-opening. I just found it on Google Scholar. Throw it into Google Scholar, it will appear. And there we go, Anne K. Mellor, Possessing Nature, the Female in Frankenstein. The key bit I want here, and she's worded this so neatly, so brilliantly, is this moment here. But nature, capital N, feminised, as we'll see in a moment, both resists and revenges herself upon his attempts. Okay, so I want to keep that lovely alliterative phrase going in our analysis next. Resists and revenges herself upon Victor. Okay, so let's start with the first of those two R's from Miller, and let's look at resists, all right? So starting here sort of clockwise, chapter 4. One secret, which I alone possessed, was the hope to. And then we have, I pursued nature to her hiding places. So this idea that nature resists being understood or captured or mastered by our male pioneering scientist of the Enlightenment period. Midnight Labours is in there again with that idea of mockery. He isn't actually, naturally, physically capable of labour in the same way that the female of the species is. And that is further underlined, this idea of mocking and undermining him. Look at this verb here. My secret toil as I dabbled among the unhallowed damps. Okay, this was written a long time ago, but I still think that verb then had and has the connotations of messing around and just, I don't know, being reckless and experimenting with no real skill or aim. So you might say that, oh, I dabbled in a bit of Chinese cooking, in which case, you know, it sort of implies you're not that great at Chinese cooking, or, oh, I dabble in a bit of geography, and you're not really great at geography, okay? So there's just an experimental boy, if you like, trying to master and mirror and match the amazing powers of fertility and creation that women already have. So in a sense, this is no achievement. This is just an attempt to match and become level with the amazing power of the female and what they already possess. Moving around here to the chapter 2 quote, this can also be used, I think, to speak to Enlightenment pioneering and egotism as well. The most learned philosopher knew little more. He had partially unveiled the face of nature, given a capital N here, still with that gendered pronoun though, but her immortal lineaments were still a wonder and a mystery. He, the scientists, might do this. And then we get to Victor and his initial failures. I had gazed upon the fortifications and impediments that seemed to keep human beings from entering the citadel of nature. So I guess by extension, Victor sort of sees himself as conquering a feminized nature here. If you look in these sort of kind of military battle terms with fortifications, sort of castles and strongholds and citadels, fortresses, which kind of are used to kind of govern or control the city. This is where nature is holed up, if you like, this kind of impregnable stronghold and castle that no one can attack and break through and conquer and claim. Later on, I guess Victor sees himself as doing that. So a victory, he believes, over a feminized nature, but push that into then all these maternal birth words which Mary Shelley uses to undermine all of these things. So labours, here's another one here. I traversed the streets without any clear conception of where I was or what I was doing. This quote comes from chapter 5, as you can see, when Victor has fled the house in horror and fear towards or because of the creature he has created. Now, this use of conception undermines in a further way. Victor has made the creature, of course. He has fled from the creature in horror. But here he is, our pioneering male genius, if you like, ironically. He's walking the streets. Now he has created the creature, and having fled from it, without any clear idea, belief or knowledge of where I was or what I was doing. So there's that sort of stepped approach again and the failure of it. I can create life. Oh, what do I do with this? I've created life. I don't quite like how it looks. It's not gone to plan. Here I am lost, with no idea of where I was or what I was doing. Now, this quote can link brilliantly into kindness, which is our next topic after birth and nature imagery. The reason being is that Victor Frankenstein, pioneering scientist, absolutely no question about that. What to do with the creature you've brought to life or brought into existence, showing it kindness, giving it love, affection, teaching it, rearing it, not a clue. So without any clear conception, absolutely true in many, many ways. And that is to Victor's failing. And as we're going to see when we look at nature, towards the end of this category, potentially failing the entirety of mankind. Okay, so we'll start down the bottom here with this chapter 4 quote at the bottom of the page. Linking in with that stepped approach and that sort of blinkered lack of foresight, really, which I think Shelley wants to point out and highlight about Victor to undermine and mock him again. Lots of sort of self-glorifying imagery here. So the astonishment which I had at first experienced on this discovery soon gave place to delight and rapture. After so much time spent in painful labour, more sort of birth parallels, real genuine maternal birth here, to arrive at once at the summit of my desires. Many mentions of mountains and the regions which Victor explores. Mont Blanc is referenced a few times. It's in this era of the Enlightenment when mankind first climbs to the summit of Mont Blanc, and that becomes a sort of metaphor really for Enlightenment, pioneering and firsts, that mindset that sort of possesses and inspirits and takes over and consumes your characters like Robert Walton and Victor Frankenstein. So I think it's very interesting that Mary Shelley has Victor describe this achievement in this kind of contemporary allusion in terms of arriving at the summit of my desires. And look at the self-congratulatory tone here. This was the most gratifying consummation of my toils. Keep an eye on this then. But the discovery was so great and overwhelming that all the steps by which I had been progressively led to it were obliterated. And this is the key bit here in terms of this short-sightedness and this blinkered nature of Victor's pursuit. So I forgot all the steps I took to achieve it, and I beheld only the result. That monomaniacal blinkered focus on wanting to enter the pantheon of genius pioneers. Victor's made this thing, and as we've mentioned before with that chapter 5 quote, what do I do now? I've made one. What happens next? Don't know. Oh, I'm scared of this, I'll run away like a frightened little boy. And then the catastrophic consequences which ensue from that. So I beheld only the result, I think, is Shelley mocking Victor there, saying all he has ever been focused on is the result, underpinned by this vanity and this pride and this egotism. Now he's actually brought a being into life. He does not have the faintest idea of how to go about rearing and caring for that creature. Moving around to the top there, clockwise, another handy little quote if you need more evidence. After days and nights of incredible labour and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of, nay, more. So that sort of pat on the back wasn't enough for himself. No, more than that. I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. And you can see why some of those Hammer horror films have Victor Frankenstein have a peal of sort of maniacal laughter. And the famous quote that's not in the book but is in the films, "It's alive." I can sort of see where that's coming from, really, even though it's not in the book. Then we come around to a later quotation here, which is in the white box. So we're starting to look here at that other R which Miller brings up, which is revenge. Okay, so most times the creature appears, it tends to be accompanied by imagery demonstrating the power of nature. It's often lightning, not always the case, but it is here. A flash of lightning illuminated the object and discovered its shape plainly to make its gigantic stature, the deformity of this, that and the other. With the lightning reappearing there's just a reminder that the element of nature which Victor Frankenstein, quote unquote, dabbled with recklessly and foolishly, in an ill thought out way, that's the force of nature which has helped bring to life this thing which is apparently more hideous than belongs to humanity. When we get to monsters and monstrousness, we'll see it's actually mankind which is more monstrous than this. That's to come later. So there's a clump of trees mentioned again, a clump of trees near me. That might send you back to the first video and the heat and light motif of the power of the lightning, absolutely just eviscerating a powerful oak tree. So more reminders that Victor has dabbled with a force extremely beyond his control, and luckily and recklessly managed to achieve something with it. Now the consequences are starting to emerge. Now the idea of revenge, because of his efforts to control and harness the power of nature, are starting to be visited upon Victor. Cracking a little bit of parenthesis here in this parenthetical clause, more mockery. Could he be? I shuddered at the conception, the murderer of my brother. Well, this is your conception, and may you well shudder, Victor Frankenstein, because of your inability to show kindness, etc., etc. Forces beyond your control, etc., etc. There's a brilliant little quotation that hits many ideas which we've discussed so far. A couple of quick quotations here, getting into the consequences of Victor's dabbling with nature, and the monstrous and terrifying and possibly genocidal consequences of his dabbling with nature. Look at how the glory has gone now, and Victor removes the agency, his own role or active role in bringing the creature to life. Earlier it was all about the glory, wasn't it? I have done this, I have dead matter and material. Now it's more passive here. Look, the night on which he first received life. Oh, how did that happen then, Victor? You did this. There is guilt emerging here, so my own hands. So he's not completely denying, quite the opposite here in fact, but I thought this was quite a revealing moment when maybe he's trying to distance himself from the act and who is responsible, subconsciously maybe. Alas, I had turned loose into the world. So we're getting towards the idea of genocide here. The elimination of mankind because of his efforts and his experimentations with nature, things which should not be dabbled or messed with. Slightly different angle on birth here. This is when the creature demands a female mate, and then Victor's rolling the consequences of this around his mind. The fear that the creature will also reproduce. A race of devils would be propagated upon the earth, and the existence of mankind might be in danger or at peril. Consequences again, the existence of the whole human race. So how far has our Prometheus fallen? How awful are the consequences and outcomes of his experiments with nature? He was, Victor felt, to be worshipped as a god who would bestow life and bring a brand new species into creation. People would worship and bow as though he's some kind of god. Oh dear. Instead, he's now looking at having his name associated with the eradication of the species. Quick shift back to Anne Miller here before we go on to a different angle or a different approach to nature. In this reading, she's seeing the creature as sort of symbolising nature, representing it. So she says here, his creature, the great object, was swallowed up, turns against him, destroying not only his brother William, his soulmate Clerval, spoilers, his loyal servant Justine, his grief-stricken father and his wife, but finally pursuing Victor himself to his death, leaving Frankenstein entirely without progeny. Nature's revenge, as symbolised by the creature who was sort of begot or constructed through Victor's tampering with nature, Prometheus' fire. Revenge is absolute. He, Victor, who violates his sacred hiding places, is destroyed. Okay, so there's a massive sort of, if you like, eco-critical message there as well, and a sort of feminist message when you take into account the way nature has been feminised and personified as female by Shelley throughout the novel. If you tamper with this supreme power, there are dire, disastrous and deadly consequences. Okay, starting to veer towards a couple of different angles or approaches to nature now. So we've got number 1 and number 2 here. The first one is starting to veer towards, I'm going to add an extra R to Anne Mellor's brilliant reading and her study of Frankenstein. She had obviously resists and revenges. Now we're going to get towards replenishes or restores, I think. The nurturing power of nature. So if you look at this quote here, the sight of the awful and majestic in nature had indeed always the effect of solemnizing my mind and causing me to forget the passing cares of life. So this aspect of nature gives almost release and restores and replenishes and nurtures. So we'll look at some quotes relating to that. The second one here is going towards the idea of nature's superiority. Okay, so we've done sort of power and destruction, but there's another quote there using the gendered pronoun. So we're looking at nature here, and we're being reminded that whatever Victor achieves, it's pathetic and paltry in relation to the supreme power of nature, the way it just shattered an oak tree without any effort at all through the lightning. So we got here the beautiful Mont Blanc and the assemblage of snowy mountains that in vain endeavour to emulate her, sometimes coasting the opposite banks. We saw the mighty Jura opposing its dark side, etc., etc. So we're going for 2 ideas here. That replenishing idea, but also a reminder of how nature is vastly superior to anything man might accomplish by tampering or dabbling with nature. Okay, so let's look at the nurturing, restorative side of nature here with this quote from chapter 4. This one beginning the summer months past. Victor's engrossed in his study. Look at the damage of being monomaniacally attached to his study and neglecting nature here. So there's a description of nature, beautiful seas, and never did the fields. And the same feelings which made me neglect the scenes around me caused me also to forget those friends who were so many miles absent and whom I had not seen for so long a time. I'll refer you to another quote from Mellor here. She says, Mary Shelley envisions nature, capital N, as a sacred life force in which human beings ought to participate in conscious harmony. So we're getting towards this romanticist philosophy. Obviously, her husband is Percy Bysshe Shelley, celebrated retrospectively as one of the romanticist poets. The importance of nature, it's their muse, it's sort of God's best work as an artist, etc., etc. So distance from that almost makes Victor forget how to love, or the importance and the necessity of love and kindness in his life. Moving down here to chapter 7 as well, look at the restorative nature here. So the context for this is just returning home after news of William's death. Painful state of mind here, full stop. I contemplated the lake, the waters were placid, all around was calm, and we got palaces of nature. By degrees, the calm and heavenly scene restored me, and I continued my journey towards Geneva. Another key quote from Anne Meller here as well. She says, Mary Shelley's novel thus portrays the penalties of raping nature. These are her words, okay? Nature has a capital N there. New sentence. But it also celebrates an all-creating nature loved and revered by human beings. Those characters capable of deeply feeling the beauties of nature, capital N, are rewarded with physical and mental health. So there's this completely other side to nature which Shelley shows as well. Destructive, powerful, not to be meddled with, above the tinkerings and the meddlings of mere mankind. However, it's almost medicinal, and we're going to see quotes in a minute, bringing back that idea of female personification, almost maternal and nurturing as well. Okay, last quote here from chapter 9. I'll largely leave this to look through for yourself if you wish. This just helps prove the superiority idea. So the immense mountains and precipices that overhung me on every side. So there's his smallness and his insignificance in comparison to that. So you've got words like almighty. Even though he ascends higher, there are still things which tower over him. We've got an idea here, look, the mighty Alps whose white and shining pyramids and domes towered above all. Now, pyramids, obviously that's the shape of them, we understand that, but I think there's a little nod there in the sense that the mountains are being described as something man-made in terms of their shape. So I think there's a juxtaposition created by Mary Shelley there, saying, well look, mankind can make these feats of engineering and achievement and power and glory, but they're only small compared to the actual mighty Alps. So there's that superiority idea as well. A little bit of nice symbolism here to pick up on. Shelley has Victor notice ruined castles hanging on the precipices, on the edges, precarious, dangerously dangling towards the edge where they will fall, of piney mountains. Little reminder from the previous video that Frankenstein means stone of the Franks. There was also the Frankenstein castle, which is 2 centuries before Shelley writes the novel, an alchemist engaged in experiments. So we're getting with the idea of, well, dabbling, alchemy, galvanism, ideas of the occult, all this kind of stuff. It will lead to ruin and falling from those precipices down into the abyss of horror, death and gloom. Moving into what we could certainly start to regard as Mother Nature here. And the best one for this is absolutely, has to be in an essay if you're going to go down this road, depending on the question and the argument, is this moment here from chapter 9. Victor's lost in pain again, as he always is. The very winds whispered. I love that alliteration. The winds whispered. In soothing accents. This is almost a mother lullabying a child to sleep and cuddled to the bosom and nurtured and cared for. And maternal nature bade me weep no more. Then again the kindly influence ceased to act. I found myself fettered again to grief and indulging in all the miseries of reflection. So temporarily, but there is that power of nature. Go back to the Meller quote that we had a minute ago, an all-creating nature, loved and revered, capable of rewarding its followers with physical and mental health, giving an idea of tranquility there, but the personification there and that maternal imagery, very, very important for these ideas, this ideology about a feminised nature that Shelley's text is asserting. Extra little quote about the maternal here. So we had whispered and soothing over on the top right there, the same lulling sounds acted as, there it is, a lullaby to my too keen sensations. Head upon the pillow, sleep crept over me. I felt it as it came and blessed the giver of oblivion. Okay, so to be released from his torment and his thoughts and his guilt, which he increasingly has throughout the novel, there's that maternal side of nature again. This moment from chapter 10 here is quite interesting. They're still with that idea of superiority over mere mankind, all right? We are just, Prometheus. There are gods above Prometheus. But it's not a sort of competition or a conquest now. It's almost Shelley saying that this is a moment where Victor accepts that he is inferior to nature. He is small and it is superior to him. It's not a contest now. He seems to surrender to this idea. The eagle soaring amidst the clouds, the glittering pinnacle, that's kind of symbolic of his achievement and his enlightenment pioneering ego. But look, they all gathered round me and bade me be at peace. So it seems in that moment he stops trying to compete with nature and accepts his inferiority to it. There's a calmness and a tranquility afforded to him here. Just moving round to chapter 22 there, we also see that quote we had earlier, okay? Last little sort of reference to nature being personified, trying to emulate her. We can see peace and tranquility if you forego that or abandon it. We also see the care and the love and the nurturing nature can give if you don't fight it and contest it. So I thought we'd finish our examination of birth and nature with these famous quotes here. The one from chapter 2, where Victor recalls the oak, the dazzling light, nothing remained but a blasted stump. So that's superior power of nature. Little quote here. And I'll go straight to this one to put alongside chapter 2, chapter 19. So there's his own reference. And this kind of comes full circle, really. But I am a blasted tree. The bolt has entered my soul, and I felt then that I should survive to exhibit what I shall soon cease to be. A miserable spectacle of wrecked humanity, pitiable to others, much like the creature, more on them parallels later, and intolerable to myself. So absolutely wanting to look at the journey here in terms of the oak disappeared, a blasted stump, and then I am a blasted tree. So a fair bit of gap between those two bits. But there's the interesting sort of character arc or downfall. Or I don't know, if you're looking at tragedy, you'd say peripeteia, of Victor Frankenstein there through that nature imagery. Nice little quote there as well, showing you meddling with superior powers and superior forces. A ravine of snow, stones, stone of the Franks, continually roll from above. That's superiority again. One of them is particularly dangerous. The slightest sound produces a concussion of air sufficient to draw destruction upon the head of the speaker. So, final word on nature from the brilliant Anne Miller. Very useful quote here. She says, "The atmospheric effects of the novel, which most readers have dismissed as little more than the traditional trappings of Gothic fiction, in fact manifest the power of nature to punish those who transgress her boundaries. The elemental forces that Victor has released pursue him to his hiding places." Remember earlier he spoke about wanting to pursue and follow nature to her hiding places, raging round him like avenging furies. Brilliant stuff. Thank you, Anne Miller. So, goodbye nature, hello kindness, even though we saw an example of nature demonstrating kindness in one of its many faces. I'm taking us to this key moment here in chapter 5. Obviously the creation of the creature, it's been well studied. However, this is really important in terms of the making of a monster. So his jaws opened and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. He might have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand was stretched out, and this is the key bit here, seemingly to detain me, but I escaped and rushed downstairs. Now, I think it's makes sense here to say how Victor misinterprets that. It is a thing brought to life. Here it is, awake and alive in the world, and that's the only other living thing around it, in the same way that something will be born and want to cuddle and lean into its mother or its father or something like that, straight from the moment of birth. Why is that seemingly to detain Victor? It could be reaching out in terms of love or the need for kindness or affection. This one moment, this misinterpretation, has the sort of ripple effects, the consequences of what becomes a lack of kindness through rejection, to alienation, to plain cruelty, the polar opposite of kindness, and then the descent into monster, and then monstrousness. Okay, so that's such a key moment which will inspire everything we want to talk about in terms of kindness or the lack of it, and also the descent from creature to monster. Calling upon Anne Mellor's brilliant work again here. We've got the opening bit of her bit of research. I've highlighted this, sorry, so it's not very clear, even though that's not the intention. She starts off talking here about a consequence of the sexual division of labour. Masculine work is kept outside of the domestic realm, hence intellectual activity is segregated from emotional activity. So we're getting towards the failings of Victor Frankenstein as a man. So look at video 1 in terms of all the enlightenment stuff and male ego. It links brilliantly with this inability to demonstrate kindness, and a split, a very sort of binary split between intellectual and emotional things. The Victorian era, I guess, would class as the split between head and heart, and they would gender man as being reason, intellect and intelligence, sorry ladies, and also female as being linked to emotional and feelings, usually in a hierarchical way, I'm sorry to say, but that sort of classical Victorian sort of idea. And before that, of course, this links to Mellor's brilliant quote here, look. Victor Frankenstein cannot do scientific research and, if you like, at the same time, think lovingly of Elizabeth and his family at the same time. Remember the quote we just saw previously about how he monomaniacally obsesses over his work and neglects nature and loses the capacity to love and mingle with friends and loved ones? It's the same here. So Mellor then goes on to argue this bit here, which is really key. Because Frankenstein cannot work and love at the same time, he fails to feel empathy for the creature he is constructing, and callously makes him 8 feet tall simply because the minuteness of the parts formed a great hindrance to my speed. He then fails to love or feel any parental responsibility. See above that key quote from chapter 5. For the freak, that's Mellor's own words, he has created. Okay, so there seems to be sort of kind of a shut off really. If Victor Frankenstein, as Mary Shelley portrays him, is in scientific intellectual mode, if you like, there is no ability to engage in kindness, feelings, emotional activity. And it's that failing which results in him shunning and rejecting the creature whose appearance terrifies him, and kind of the enormity of him dawns upon Victor, and he flees. From that rejection, we'll see more examples in a moment, this absence or denial of kindness, we then see a creature become a monster, largely down to the true monster of this novel, which is mankind. So we spoke earlier about precipice and precipice imagery, a sort of tipping point really, a hinge point where outcomes can go either way. In chapter 10 here, before the creature sort of takes over the narrative in a major way, we have this, look. So I am thy creature, and I will be even mild and docile to my natural lord and king, if thou wilt also perform thy part. That type of mistake from me, sorry, that which thou owest me. O Frankenstein, be not equitable to every other, and trample upon me alone, to whom thy justice and even thy clemency and affection is most due. Okay, and then down the bottom here, make me happy, and I shall again be virtuous. Okay, so it's the denial and the bestowing of kindness which Victor owes towards the creature, which leads to the descent of the creature into alienation, cruelty at the hand of mankind again. We'll show you some examples of that in a moment, and that descent into monstrousness. Just a few things on language here as well while we're on. The stuff in blue here, you can see that idea of superiority. The creator is easily overthrown by the created. Ideas of Gothic inversion here, of a power inversion. The stuff in purple here, there's a sort of legal / religious semantic field here, that kindness is something the creature deserves, and if there was any justice in this relationship, then Victor would be returning that and bestowing kindness upon the thing he has created here. So look, justice owest, most due, and clemency, sort of religious connotations there as well. There in green, affection, sort of synonym for kindness, which has not been given towards the creature. But if you look at that conditional tense, if thou wilt perform thy part, and I shall again be virtuous. Power is in Victor's hands here. It's nothing to do with scientific pioneering and enlightenment, sort of innovation. It's the basic, but sadly lacking, human capacity to demonstrate kindness, which is, you could then argue, even more important and necessary than bending the rules of science or innovating in terms of scientific and biological knowledge. A key moment here in terms of the creature watching the De Lacey's. From this, I'll bring in some more of Anne Mellor in a moment. This is a really important moment which shows that kindness is latent within the creature. It's shown here. It is demonstrated that the creature can and does exhibit, feel, and then return kindness, if he has shown it as an example from others, in this case the De Lacey's. So this example wasn't set. The removal of that parental responsibility and kindness from Victor, stuck in his scientific mode, means that we've got an alienated creature. Only now, in his alienated state, peering at the De Lacey's from his hovel, does he learn kindness. Also, a quick word on structuring here. It's only in these chapters where the creature sort of occupies the middle or the centre of the novel. His narrative occupies the centre of the novel structurally. We are seeing that earlier claim proven, where he can again, that was his word from earlier, demonstrate kindness and nobility, and once more show virtue, I think was the one from the previous slide. So very important we see that here from witnessing the De Lacey's. The creature also acquires and enjoys, it seems, the act of reciprocating and returning kindness once he has witnessed it demonstrated by other human beings. Don't forget the creature, like any living thing, I guess, brought to life, is a blank slate, a tabula rasa. Until something is imprinted on that blank slate, then it doesn't start to take on any kind of personality or sense of right and wrong or morality, for better or for worse. Now he's witnessing kindness. Look, this trait of kindness moved me sensibly. And then he starts to learn the sense of others and the importance of preserving and looking after other people. This was not taught to him by an extremely neglectful parent figure, only focused on science and glory and ego and vanity and monomaniacal pursuits. So, in a way, the creature is getting its sort of parenthood, really, its kind of socialisation from watching the de Lacys through his hovel. Speaking of the de Lacys, some more of the brilliant work from Anne Mellor here in terms of the de Lacy family and what they sort of represent, really. If you look here, it gets a bit autobiographical, which I'd warn you against, particularly if you're an AQA student, but this is fascinating stuff, maybe to explore at degree level or just for your own interest. More importantly, the structure of the de Lacy family constitutes Mary Shelley's ideal, an ideal derived from her mother's vindication of the rights of woman. Her mother was an extremely impressive woman, as was her father in a way. What a family to be born into. In the impoverished de Lacy household, all work is shared equally in an atmosphere of rational companionship, mutual concern and love. Okay, so before we shortly go on to look at how mankind is monstrous, let's balance that really with this depiction of the de Lacy family, as this may be aspirational model or symbol of how humanity can get it right and can be perfect, really. This is sort of Edenic, I think, in terms of human kindness. So Mellor goes into the aptonymic nature of the names: Felix, happiness; Agatha, goodness; Sapphi, Sophie or wisdom or sophistry. And look at this, look, Sapphi appears, she flees oppression, she is welcomed, taught to read, write, she's embraced even though she's an outsider. This all, of course, has parallels to the creature who is an outsider, the ultimate outsider, of course, and that painful but brilliantly written scene where acceptance is not shown towards that outsider. The acceptance of Sapphi, in a way, just serves to add further weight to the tragedy of the creature not being accepted. So, and then it gets a bit autobiographical in terms of Mary Wollstonecraft, extensive traveller, arguing for equality between the sexes. But if you look here, this alternative nuclear family structure based on sexual equality and mutual affection is lost in the novel. And there's some of the treatments and attitudes demonstrated towards Mary Wollstonecraft, because she was so ahead of her time, arguing for equality with the British press. The more things change, the more they stay the same, denouncing someone progressive and inclusive as a harlot, an atheist and an anarchist. Okay, so some interesting sort of biographical analogies there between the characters within the de Lacy household and Shelley's own family and the loss of her mother at an early age. So back to the ideas of kindness and the de Lacy family held up as this beacon or pinnacle of kindness, inclusion, equality, and I guess the best example of mankind at its best when displaying kindness. A pretty important and powerful moment here in terms of kindness, or the lack of it. There's the creature rewarding or aiding, coming to the assistance of another person, and look at his reward, look at what he is repaid with. This was the reward of my benevolence. I had saved a human being from destruction, and as a recompense, I now writhed under the miserable pain of a wound which shattered the flesh and bone. The feelings of kindness and gentleness which I had entertained but a few moments before gave place to hellish rage and gnashing of teeth. I vowed eternal hatred and vengeance to all mankind. So, in a way, it's extremely understandable that the creature is now inspired, or as a catalyst in its descent into monster and monstrousness. Mankind is that catalyst. So that's obviously building towards that idea of our up and coming theme of mankind's monstrousness, which is after this. Very important to reiterate that idea of structuring here as well. Remember, this, the creature's perspective, afforded through Victor's narrative, which is overall ultimately afforded by Robert Walton, who's in charge of all the micro stories, if you like, is at the heart of the novel. We do not get this moment until towards the centre of the chapters or the centre of the narrative. Very important that we understand that, and that evidence and proof of the creature's compassionate nature, the creature's nobility, the creature's ability to demonstrate and display kindness towards others is withheld or deferred until the centre of the novel. Then, as we start to progress outwards beyond and after the creature's perspective, back towards Victor's perspective and Robert Walton's perspective, their view on the creature's actions are obviously biased in terms of monster, fiend, wretch, devil, demon, and all these kinds of names the creature is daubed with. We must remember the things which Shelley chooses to put at the centre or the heart of these framing narratives or multiple perspective narratives in this epistolary form is the creature's perspective and how it is absolutely capable and has shown kindness previously before declaring itself the enemy and vengeance upon all mankind. And finally, on kindness, a key quote here from chapter 16, a real key point in the creature's descent into monstrousness. The cold stars shone in mockery. Little last vestiges of sort of nature here present or around as the creature descends here, and now and then the sweet voice of a bird burst forth amidst the universal stillness. Very understandable reasons behind the creature's motivations here. Look, all save I, except I, were at rest or in enjoyment. I, like the arch-fiend, bore a hell within me, and finding myself unsympathised with. Okay, so no empathy, no compassion, no kindness. Rejected, alienated, all alone, a monster is made. Okay, and look at the rage. Wished to tear up the trees, spread havoc and destruction around me, and then to have sat down and enjoyed the ruin. Okay, so we're seeing the creature here being consumed by anger and revenge. Keep an eye on that bore of hell within me. In the previous slides, or a couple of slides, we spoke about how kindness and empathy and concern and kindness towards others were innate or latent within the creature. Mixture of both, really, innate and latent. It was in him. It just needed an example to inspire, I guess like any living thing, the creature to show it towards others. And then that's that hinge point of whether someone comes out monstrous or compassionate and with empathy, or it gives rise to sociopaths and psychopaths and criminals and all those kinds of things in society. But now, anger and rage seems to be the dominant note or characteristic. I bore a hell within me. There was none among the myriads of men that existed who would pity kindness or assist kindness me. And should I feel kindness towards my enemies? It's a fair question. No. From that moment, keep an eye on this, I declared everlasting war against the species, and more than all, against him who had formed me and sent me forth to this insupportable misery. So the stuff about being an awful or absent or neglectful parent, which Anne Meller raised earlier when we were looking at birth and nurture, look at the repercussions of that. I've drawn attention here to the word species. We're starting to see, which is the final topic we get at, is paralleling between the creature and Victor. Remember the word species associated with Victor earlier? A new species will bless me as its creator. So, many ways in which Mary Shelley is a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant writer. One of the ways is these subtle parallels and these little hooks back and forth within the paralleling. The use of the word species here, I think, is designed to hook the reader back structurally to the moment where Victor was planning this great benevolent benefit to mankind about his science and what that will afford the human species. No, he conquered that and he did that. His fatal mistake, fatal for all his loved ones and friends as well, not showing kindness. So all of that, I think, comes from that very deliberate structuring which triggers that previous moment earlier in the narrative. Okay, there's the monstrous outcomes and repercussions of withholding and not showing kindness. Okay, so a key and classic concept arising from the brilliant Frankenstein is the idea of mankind's monstrousness, and a classic feature of Gothic literature as well. One of the ways in which Gothic literature tries to disturb and terrify and unsettle us is often through the idea of inversion, okay? So turning something inside out and upside down. So for example, the idea that a doctor who has taken the Hippocratic Oath to preserve life is then someone or something which is hell-bent on destroying or taking life, or an agent of the law is actually the worst criminal going, or all these kinds of things, okay? So turning something inside out or upside down is a feature of how the Gothic tries to disturb our sensibilities and unsettle and terrify us. Here, the idea, and it's usually based on a hierarchy as well. So man would be above a monster or a beast, and that would be at the top. But what happens when that gets inverted and there's no difference or distance between? That's part of the unsettling thing Mary Shelley's going for here. So some key quotes here to help you illustrate that. It's not a complex idea, but it's one of the most fascinating ideas or views proposed by the book, I think. So for me, the expression of this Gothic inversion doesn't get any clearer than this moment from chapter 9, when Elizabeth is talking to Victor after the death of Justine, a poor, unfortunate Justine Moritz, framed and not guilty, and then we later learn who was to blame, etc., etc. So there's Elizabeth talking to Victor there. But now misery has come home, and men appear to me as monsters, thirsting for each other's blood. So again, I don't think it gets any clearer than that. And if you're arguing this in an essay, that quote has to go in somewhere, I think, if depending on the focus of your question, of course. There's another decent quote here which goes with that idea of showing the unsettling Gothic inversion. We have here, alas, Victor, what falsehood can look so like the truth? Beg your pardon. When falsehood can look so like the truth, who can assure themselves of certain happiness? So there's that deeply disturbing idea filtered through Elizabeth, that if we can't tell virtue from vice, if we can't tell one from the other, we're in this kind of Gothic uncertainty and terror, really, of not being able to distinguish between man and monster. Would you like a really powerful example of mankind's monstrousness in the novel? I'm playing with the order here. The previous quote was from chapter 9, but just look at this in chapter 8 in terms of mankind's monstrousness. This is Justine. I did confess, but I confessed a lie. I confessed that I might obtain absolution. And look at the priest here. Ever since I was condemned, my confessor has besieged me. He threatened and menaced until I almost began to think that I was the monster that he said I was. Okay? Nothing monstrous at all about poor, young, innocent Justine Moritz. But there's an atrocity there in terms of sort of members of the clergy bullying and oppressing Justine into a confession, so society has its scapegoat and someone to blame for murder, even though we know, and later it's confirmed, Justine does not have a role in that murder at all. But look at that. There's kind of bullying and the idea of labelling, I guess. The cruelty with which mankind is capable of demonstrating, it can easily, very quickly, in an abuse of power, make or label people as monsters and demonise them to the extent that the death penalty for someone completely innocent and undeserving of such monstrous cruelty. Just seeing a wider pattern there, I think Shelley's getting towards the idea of those whose society will cruelly, sometimes wrongly, ostracise and alienate and banish. That can be acts of the opposite of kindness, the monstrousness here. Look at the parallels with the creature later on. What could I do? In an evil hour I subscribed to a lie. And this is very reminiscent of the creature. And now only am I truly miserable. Okay, miserable wretch, I am all alone, no one else understands my plight, everyone else is resting and sleeping. So numerous creature parallels there, but through figures who are demonised and labelled as a monster and ostracised and alienated and banished. Here's the creature talking to the head of the De Lacy household, the old blind father. There's a few more moments here which you might use for kindness. A few bonus extras there. Bit of dialogue here from the De Lacy father to the creature. Obviously, the father cannot judge the creature. He is blind. He does not have that immediate physical, prejudicial, superficial and shallow judgment based on appearance. Mankind does. There's another instance of that where the creature's attacked by villagers. But the father says here to the creature of mankind, do not despair. To be friendless is indeed to be unfortunate, but the hearts of men, and this is the key bit I want to focus on as well, when unprejudiced by any obvious self-interest, are full of brotherly love and charity. Rely therefore on your hopes, and if these friends are good and amiable, kindness by another name, do not despair. Now, it's that little embedded or subordinate clause in there I wish to focus on. So, men are all right. Men are full of brotherly love and charity. When, I kind of want to replace that with if, to put across the sentiment I'm going for here, which I think Shelley is getting at here as well. If unprejudiced by any obvious self-interest. There's the weakness. There is the flaw in terms of mankind. And there is mankind's potential, mankind's Achilles heel, if you like, for a descent into monstrousness, self-interest. That is the thing which seemingly stops us being or demonstrating or displaying kindness to some degree, a large degree, a median degree. That is the thing which engenders monstrousness, I think. And it's certainly on show in terms of Victor Frankenstein, his self-interest and his ego, which you've gone into in the previous video. Mary Shelley using the creature's dialogue here to put across her views on this matter in a similar way she's just done with the De Lacy father as well. This is the creature talking here. Their prejudice against me, but a fatal prejudice clouds their eyes, and where they ought to see a feeling and kind friend, they behold only a detestable monster. Okay, and there's the idea, I am blind and cannot judge of your countenance. There's another critique from Mary Shelley, that we are too quick to judge superficially based on exteriors. This, I think, has parallels to her own career as a writer and a female as well, but that's for another day or another video maybe. And then we see how the creature is kind of warmed and heartened by this. Excellent man, I thank you and accept your generous offer. You raise me from the dust by this kindness. So another brilliant quote for kindness there before we truly leave that. Parallels with sort of Adam as well. I ought to be thy Adam Instead, I am your devil, or your rejected Lucifer. So there's the creature as the first man, if you like, and ought to be treated as such, but obviously isn't. In a few slides prior to this, when we were looking at nature, we were looking at how Shelley asserted the superiority, physical and sort of strength-wise in terms of the creature. The creature's here is being attacked by the returning de Lacys, who can view him in terms of his physicality and his appearance, and obviously he's attacked as something monstrous and grotesque. Look at this though from the creature. Shelley is quick to remind the reader here of the nobility of the creature. I could have torn him limb from limb, as the lion rends, or tears if you like, the antelope. But my heart sank within me as with bitter sickness, and I refrained. Okay, so just a little reminder there that the creature, careful of my words there, because there is a difference between creature and monster. It's a process to become a monster. Mankind is the catalyst, as we mentioned. There's a little reminder that there's nothing cruel, savage, or violent about the creature here as yet. Okay. This moment here from chapter 17, I think, is proof of that quote-unquote fatal prejudice which clouds the sight and perceptions which the creature just spoke of to the blind de Lacy father. So there's the creature scolding Victor for how inconsistent his feelings are. Then we shift back to Victor. Here's the creature's words. Had a strange effect upon me. Okay, after an interesting sentence and an interesting pause there. I compassionated him and sometimes felt a wish to console him. Now, very important to pause there. There is a flicker, all right? There is a small fleeting moment when kindness may, or threatened to, surface within Victor's heart, arguably for the first time, towards his creation. But look, true to form, true to mankind's inherent monstrousness and their fatal prejudice, to use the creature's words. But when I looked upon him, filthy mass, moved, heart sickened, feelings altered, horror, hatred, etc., etc. Okay, so it is indeed a fatal prejudice of mankind. I think Mary Shelley is arguing that mankind cannot fail to judge superficially on looks and appearance and prejudgmental, preconceived ideas to evaluate the worth of a living thing. Here's the creature framing others for the murder. Look at the language here though in terms of mankind's monstrousness, and come back to that idea of tabula rasa again, a blank slate. No one is born with the desire to commit mischief or frame other people for murder, or to deceive, manipulate, tell lies, cruelty. We're not born with that. It has to be learned and acquired. If you do child language, you'll know about behaviourism or psychology and all these kinds of things. Look at this thought and look at the creature reflecting on the sort of genesis, the birth and the development of this idea. The thought was madness. It, the thought, stirred the fiend within me. Not I, but she shall suffer. The murder I have committed, because I am forever robbed of all that she could give me, she shall atone. The crime had its source in her, be hers the punishment. Thanks to the lessons of Felix and the sanguinary, brutal, bloody laws of man, I had learned now to work mischief. Okay, so the creature teaches itself to read, and from the 3 books I think it reads, it learns how to make mischief. If this is one of the key stages on the creature's descent into monstrousness, he's had no better teacher or instructor in monstrousness than mankind. There's your inversion again. Okay, last of all on our journey here are identifying there are just so many of the parallels which Mary Shelley creates between man, especially Victor Frankenstein, and the so-called monster. We're at chapter 16 here, which is just such a key chapter in the narrative. In the same way that the chapters, I think it's chapter 5, most probably chapter 3, 4, 5, where Victor hits his apotheosis, his sort of height and his zenith of being a sort of enlightenment champion and pioneer. This chapter is kind of the opposite, really, depending on your point of view. This could be the creature's biggest descent into monstrousness, or, again, depending on from which point of view you look at it at, the height of his rise into monstrousness. So there's already some kind of parallel here. This is the chapter where the creature finally understands that the de Lacys are not going to provide him any companionship. He's still calling them in this chapter his protectors, bless him, but they are not his protectors. They leave the cottage. He is truly alone, the creature, and he chooses to set fire, heat and light motifs, previous video, to the de Lacy cottage and burn it to the ground. Okay, a main parallel here concerns the idea of food and feeding. We can see from the creature here that he starts to describe the agony of my feelings allowed me no respite. No incident occurred from which my rage and misery could not extract its food. Okay, so we are clearly seeing an extremely embittered character here. Rage and misery can be sort of fed or fueled by every and any incident. Now, let's just drag that back. In previous videos of enlightenment stuff as well, we've seen Shelley describe Victor's desire for knowledge in these kind of appetite, 7 deadly sins, feeding terms. So that appetite for knowledge and success, driven by ego and vanity, is what brought about the creation of the creature. The neglect of the creature, as we said, with kindness, etc., etc., leads to the descent from creature to monster. Now look at the creature here. Its sustenance, if you like, is rage and misery. So there's that ever-increasing descent or change into monstrousness, anger, consumed by revenge, and that is his feeding. So the parallel there is that idea of feeding, establishing that link between creator and created, to help with that idea of inversion we mentioned in the previous slide. So many parallels starting to occur now from chapter 16 onwards to bring that idea of the doppelganger, okay, the double, the interchangeability of the supposed hero and the supposed antagonist, to the point where you cannot tell or distinguish the supposed hero from the supposed antagonist. So there's a bit more detail you can add to that idea of inversion. Let me just read you another quote from chapter 16 here to reinforce this idea of the interchangeability of hero and antagonist. If I've chosen a good quote here, then in a way you shouldn't be able to tell who's saying this, whether it comes from the narrative voice of the creature or Victor Frankenstein. So I'm going to read you a quote here which isn't on the screen. Let me just find it. So we have, I generally rested during the day and travelled only when I was secured by night from the view of man. One morning, however, finding that my path lay through a deep wood, I ventured to continue my journey after the sun had risen. The day, which was one of the first of spring, cheered even me by the loveliness of its sunshine and the balminess of the air. I felt emotions of gentleness and pleasure that had long appeared dead revive within me. Half surprised by the novelty of these sensations, I allowed myself to be borne away by them. Okay. The quote then continues to go on and says, and forgetting my solitude and deformity, dared to be happy. Okay, so deformity obviously gives it away. Victor's obviously got a bit more of an interior deformity. His kind of decaying and ruinous pursuit of greatness, But the point of this doppelganger sort of inversion and interchangeability is the fact that you can't separate or distinguish between hero and antagonist, and that leaves us in that gothic unknowingness or uncertainty of what is good and what is evil, something Gothic writers are very, very keen to do. The parallels there, nature and sunlight and the outside world reviving the creature, being borne away by these sensations, very reminiscent of that maternal nature we spotted earlier, in terms of reviving and restoring Victor when the ravages of his scientific pursuits and guilt had brought him to this kind of desperation and ruin. Some more key and brilliant parallels here. The first one here from chapter 13. This is where the creatures come into terms with the monstrousness of man. For a long time I could not conceive how one man could go forth to murder his fellow, or even why there were laws and governments. But when I heard details of vice and bloodshed, my wonder towards mankind ceased, and I turned away with disgust and loathing. Let me take you back to chapter 5 when the creature is brought to life. We have the quote here. I had desired it, the creation of dead matter, with an ardour that far exceeded moderation. But now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I created, I rushed out of the room, and away he goes. So, turning away in revulsion and horror and disgust, both characters. Firstly, in the structure of the novel Victor, when the creature comes to life and his physical form makes Victor disgusted. Here, though, more tellingly, and later in the novel, to draw that parallel and to link man and monster, is the creature's disgust at the evil doing and the monstrous nature of mankind. So in a way, because that's later in the novel, I'd argue this has the bigger impact on the reader when a creature, born blank and kind of neutral, turns away in loathing and disgust at the cruelty and the monstrousness of mankind. Second quote here also from the creature from chapter 13. Just a few little moments here where we get this reminder that I've mentioned above, where, okay, although I'm talking about parallels, we are seeing how the creature is superior in many ways, physically and I guess morally and ethically at times. So I bore the extremes of heat and cold with less injury to my frame. My stature far exceeded theirs. So there's an example of his superiority. We've got here, though, the creature sort of cursing the fact that he encountered the de Lacys and started to covet and desire contact with humans and companionship. So he says here, "Oh, that I had forever remained in my native wood, nor known nor felt beyond the sensations of hunger, thirst and heat." So in a way he regrets this. He just wished he'd stayed a creature whose only concerns in life was his next meal, keeping warm and liquid and sustenance. However, let me take you to chapter 4, I think it is, yes, when Victor is trying to deter Robert Walton from pursuing a similar path. So Victor tells Robert Walton, "Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example. How dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his native wood, to be the world, than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow." Okay, so there's the creature much later on wishing his world had stayed smaller, just about subsistence. That links beautifully to his creator in chapter 4, trying to deter someone else from pioneering and pushing boundaries, that the man who believes his native town to be the world is much happier than those who seek beyond and further and more. There seems to be a moral of only pain and dissatisfaction lies that way for those who are pushing the boundaries and not content with the bliss and the pleasure which is already available to them or us. Two very quick examples here that although I'm doing parallels, there's the occasional and frequent reminder that they are not equals and that Victor has created a being which is more powerful and threatens to overturn the hierarchy between creator and created. So the figure passed me quickly. He was the murderer, I could not doubt it. I thought of pursuing the devil, but it would have been in vain. For another flash of lightning, a reminder he is made from that superior power, discovered him to me hanging among the rocks. He soon reached the summit and disappeared. So there's that idea that Victor labours and struggles in pursuit of the creature, but to stay ahead is not much effort or exertion at all for the creature. Similarly here in chapter 20, I would have seized him, but he eluded me and quitted the house with precipitation. So this being can reach the pinnacle and the heights much more quickly, much more easily, with less effort than mankind. We have now been replaced by a superior species, made by our own ridiculous negligence and dabbling and tampering with nature in ways we shouldn't. So look at the speed. The boat shot across the water with an arrowy swiftness and was soon lost amidst the waves. The superiority of the creature there. Really smart moment here from Shelley, which again sort of sets that parallel up, but then pushes that idea to go beyond the similarity of a parallel, to start gesturing towards mankind as being the greater monster. So here's the creature cursing Victor. Accursed creator, why did you make me so horrible? You turned away. But my form is a filthy type of yours. More, look at that comparative adjective to go beyond the parallel, more horrid even from the very resemblance, or if you like, more horrible, more monstrous because of, or due to, that word from, due to the very resemblance to you. Okay, so if the creature is grotesque physically in terms of sight, then this brilliant quote, bit of dialogue here from the creature, is saying that it's because of or due to the connection to you, Victor Frankenstein, representing mankind, that I am grotesque. Interesting sort of laying the blame at the hands of man there in terms of the creature's monstrousness. Further one here, Shelley showing the excess and the extremities of Victor's rage here. My abhorrence of this creature cannot be conceived. When I thought of him, I gnashed my teeth. My eyes became inflamed, and I ardently wished to extinguish that life which I had so thoughtlessly bestowed. When I reflected on his crimes and malice, my hatred and revenge burst all bounds of moderation. And there's some mention of precipitated and precipice again here. So we've mentioned some of those at parallels. How's this for a brilliantly structured parallel which Shelley creates? We're looking at chapter 16 now, the amazing chapter 16. This is where the creature rescues a young girl who falls into a river and seems to be a rapid stream, beg your pardon, and is struggling to escape from it. So the creature rescues her, dragged her to shore. She was senseless, and I endeavoured, listen to this for a parallel, by every means in my power to restore animation. Remind you of anyone or anything bringing seemingly dead matter back to life? When suddenly I was interrupted by the approach of a rustic, who then sees the creature, pulls out a gun and shoots the creature. Just for this gnashing of teeth parallel, look. This was then the reward of my benevolence, kindness, another word for it. I had saved the human being from destruction, and as a recompense now writhed under the miserable pain of a wound which shattered the flesh and bone. The feelings of kindness and gentleness, which I had entertained but a few moments before, gave place to hellish rage and gnashing of teeth. Inflamed by pain, I vowed eternal hatred and vengeance to all mankind. Okay, so absolute parallels there between Victor here saying, my hatred and revenge burst all bounds of moderation. Shelley wanting to show that absolute parallel, that doppelganger effect between the supposedly heroic, civilized and noble creature of our pioneering scientist and our supposedly ignoble, wild, savage, brutish monster. If the line separating those two things is indistinguishable and cannot be drawn, then we're in this kind of gothic abyss of uncertainty and lack of clarity between man and monster. They are, or we are, each other. We are interchangeable. Okay, the very last idea I want to go for here in terms of parallels and paralleling is the idea that we've mentioned a little bit just before, but I want to flesh out in more detail. And the idea I want to go for here goes beyond the parallel, I think. It's more to do with that, I've said previously, interchangeability, where you can't really separate or distinguish between man and monster, victor and creature. Here I want to push that further by showing what I think Shelley is going for, which is an interdependency upon one another. They almost are each other's sustaining life force here. So the idea I want to go for here that I think Shelley sets up is that the destruction of each other is the thing which sustains each other. Okay, so let's have a little look at this from the creature. Then I'll give you some examples from the very last chapter of Victor's narration. So it's chapter 24 where Victor dies and the narrative is continued by Robert Walton. So just to come back to this, look at the creature here. The nearer I approached to your habitation, the nearer I get to where you, Victor, lives, the more deeply did I feel the spirit of revenge enkindled in my heart. Snow fell, waters hardened, but I rested not. Okay, so we mentioned this quote earlier in terms of food and sustaining, and how the creature is sort of sustained now by revenge, rage and misery. But look at this. The closer I get to you, the more deeply was the spirit of revenge enkindled or inflamed or increases or burns brighter in my heart. And then there's that mention of food that we saw before. Now, from that idea, I want to go and illustrate this idea of how the two characters are interdependent or interlocked. They're sort of inseparable, and they are each other in that classic sort of doppelganger mode. So yes, the destruction of each other is the thing which sustains each other. Ultimately, you have to say the creature is victorious in that Victor Frankenstein dies and the creature goes off God knows where and is at large. One of the many horrifying and unsettling ideas at the end of this novel, that a superior being created by man, which could extinguish and eradicate man, is at large. So to prove this idea of the interdependency of the two, where the destruction of the creature is the new monomaniacal pursuit of Victor, it sustains him and keeps him going. Similarly, the ruin and the destruction of Victor is the thing which gives the creature its monomaniacal goal and ambition and determination. These last two slides, the very last thing, are both taken from chapter 24. So obviously I want to draw attention to this kind of feeding thing and this strange dynamic of sustaining each other in order to bring about the destruction of their rival or their other part of themselves, if you like, in that sort of doppelganger way. So here's Victor. My present situation was one in which all voluntary thought was swallowed up and lost. So Victor becomes passive in the same way one began in video 1, talking about Robert Walton being attracted to a great discovery like the magnetic needle is attracted towards a magnetic pull. It's the same here. All thought was voluntary. I was hurried away, passive there, by fury. Revenge alone endowed me with strength and composure. It moulded my feelings. So look, revenge alone endowed me with strength. This is a normal mortal human being in, inhabitable climates and weather and stuff. But revenge almost gives him this supernatural power to continue enduring it. The dangers of ambition, I guess, but an ambition to destroy the thing which he has created. Strange one here, I think the reader can see through this. Sometimes when nature, overcome by hunger, sank under the exhaustion, a repast, a meal, was prepared for me in the desert that restored and inspirited me. Come on, Victor. I mean, I suppose he is unravelling here in terms of exhaustion, but a meal just doesn't suddenly appear in hospitable places. You can see again, the creature is then revealed to be leaving food for Victor, so that Victor is sustained and can continue the pursuit of the creature, which the creature full well knows is eventually going to destroy Victor. So look at this next quote. This is the creature speaking. You will find near this place, if you follow not too tardily, you lazy, weak, inferior human being, a dead hare. Eat and be refreshed. Come on, my enemy. We have yet to wrestle for our lives. It never gets to that, of course, but many hard and miserable hours must you endure until that period shall arrive. Scoffing devil. And look at the effect from the taunting and the scolding and the scoffing. Again do I vow vengeance, again do I devote thee, miserable fiend, to torture. Never will I give up my search until he or I perish. A little bit further on, prepare, your toils only begin. Wrap yourself in furs and provide food, for we shall soon enter upon a journey where your sufferings will satisfy my everlasting hatred. So they are locked here again in this inseparability, this interdependency on one another. In theory, the novel could go on for 94 more chapters with this quest of pursuing and evading and pursuing and evading, because they are each other. They are interdependent upon one another, with the exception that the inferior being of mankind does eventually die. Victor is no longer animated and the light goes out. So there we have it, Frankenstein, 2 videos, 5 areas, lots of detail. I hope it will be of use to you. If it is, then do the rarest of things and say thank you, thanks very much, a thumb, a click, a like, all those things. Goodbye.